Hey, this is Lee Waller, and in this video, I'm going to be taking a look at the basics of shapes and shape layers. What are they? How do you create them? How can you modify them? How can you animate them? The basics of a shape is a path, and a path consists of at least 2 points and a connecting line. It can have more than 2 points. Like you see in this path right here, there's 3 points and 2 lines. This is opened, it's not closed. We'll take a look at a closed path in a moment, but this is considered simply a path. When the path is closed, like this one, it is considered a shape. This can also be used to create masks. So at the core of every shape, you're going to have a closed path. Once you have your path, then you can add either a fill or a stroke or both. You can have a variation of the fill and the stroke, but in this example, you'll see that there's a solid fill, there's a linear gradient, and then also a radial gradient. Those can also be applied to the stroke. The lines of the path can be straight or curved. You see in this example, a few of the corners, the vertex or the points on the second image has been converted to curved, and that would be called Bezier, and those lines can be curved using handles. Shape layers are layers that can consist of one or more shapes, meaning that on one layer you can have multiple shapes. There's pros and cons to that, and we'll take a look at that a little bit later. Because of the shape layer, the shapes can be combined and modifiers can be applied to create more complex shapes. So let's jump into After Effects and start creating some shapes. I started a new composition 1920 by 1080, just 24 frames per second. Right up here at the top, you're going to find a number of tools, and we want to look for the rectangle right there. That rectangle tool is the way that we can create shapes. If you'll click down on it and hold, you'll see that it'll open up these other shapes that we can create using their tools. We'll take a look at those in just a few minutes. I'm going to go with the rectangle tool. You'll notice over here we have a few options that we can work with, the fill and the stroke. Right there on the word fill, click on it, and it opens up this dialog box. It gives us the option to change the type of fill, whether we don't want a fill, we want a solid, a linear gradient, or a radial gradient. For right now, I'm going to stick with the solid. Right here, this swatch, if you'll click on it, it gives you the ability to change the color. So you can move into the direction you want to go, then find a particular shade of the color that you might want. Once you've dialed that in, you can hit OK. And then it's very similar with the stroke. Click on the word stroke, and you have the fill options there. I'm going to leave it at a solid and hit OK. And then there's our color. I'm going to leave that at white. And then the width of the stroke based on pixels. How wide do you want this stroke? Now, don't worry, you're not locked into all of this. There's a couple of ways of changing this afterwards. And one last option, make sure that this Bezier path is not selected. We'll take a look at that a little bit later. We can just jump into the viewer, click and drag, and we've drawn a shape. We have that shape here in the viewer, and then you'll now see a shape layer down here in the timeline, and on it, it has rectangle 1. Remember that I said that you can add multiple shapes to one shape layer. I'm going to jump back up here and grab the selection tool so I don't continue to draw shapes, and we'll explore the shape layer now. So on this shape layer, we only have rectangle 1. We can open up the properties for it, click on the chevron right there, and you'll see that we have 4 categories for this shape. The first will be the path. And remember, the path is what is basically the foundation of this whole thing. You'll see this blue line right here, and let me crank up the width of that stroke right there. And you'll see that path right there. That is what is the foundation of this shape. And so we can go to the rectangle path right here, click open the properties for it. You'll see that we have size, position, and roundness. Now, I rarely touch this position property right here because there's a couple of different places for position, and I'll explain that a little bit later. So to eliminate any confusion, most of the time I will not touch these. I will work with the position of that shape in a couple of other places. Let's take a look at the size there. Right now, the size is constrained on the X and the Y axis, so it doesn't matter which one I change, it's going to adjust both of them. I can deconstrain those so I can dial this into exactly what I want. Just click the chain link right there. And then if I want, say, 500 pixels, and then I'll tab over 500 pixels, and now I have a perfect square. If we want to constrain those back, just click on the chain link, and then you can adjust that size even more. Down on the roundness, that's going to round the corners, so you can just click on that and drag that to see rounding the corners there. We'll close up the path there. Now we'll take a look at stroke, and there's a lot of different options in here. We'll take a look at more of these a little bit later, but there's 3 right now that I want to focus on. Number 1 is color. It's the same thing as what's right up here. You can click on the icon there, and you can open up the color picker and choose a new color. You can even animate this if you want to. Because there's a stopwatch right next to it, means that you can animate the color, so you can change the color over time. The next is the opacity. So you have the ability to adjust the opacity of the stroke separate from the fill, and vice versa. And then the stroke width right there. Some properties that are very useful are dashes, taper, and wave. I'll come back to those in just a few minutes. I'm going to close up the stroke now, and we'll open up the fill. This is very similar to the stroke. You have the color there and the opacity. I'm going to close up the fill, and now I'm going to take a few minutes here to explain transform properties. Hopefully you notice there are 2 sets of transform properties. One, you'll notice that it says transform rectangle 1. That is telling you that these are the transform properties for this rectangle. Remember that all layers in After Effects has the 5 basic transform properties. So this layer, this shape layer itself, has its own transform properties. So this can get a little confusing. So you need to be very specific about which transform properties you're using and why. I'm going to close up the layer transform properties for right now, and I'll open up the transform properties for the rectangle. And you'll notice that there's a few more properties in here, basically having to do with skew. We still have our anchor point, our position, our scale, rotation, and opacity. But all of these transform properties are going to be looking at the layer and where the layer is. So right now the layer is centered 960 by 540, but our shape isn't necessarily centered on that. I know that because of this position right here. So right now I'm moving just the shape, not the layer. The reason I know that is because I'm in the transform properties for the rectangle, not in the transform properties for the layer. I'm going to center this out. So I'm going to set these both to 0, which will give me an opportunity to explain again a little bit more about these transform properties. The transform properties for the shape is based on the layer. And I know this is kind of hard to understand because we're not actually seeing that layer there, but just imagine that that layer is 1920 by 1080. Yes, our composition is 1920 by 1080. So we have our composition, then we have our layers sitting on the composition, and now we have this rectangle sitting on that layer. When the shape looks at the layer, it sees that the 0 position is dead center here rather than up here in this corner. So this position property is based on 0 and 0 being right here for our X and Y. So that's a lot different than our transform properties with its position at 960 by 540 because it sees the 0 position being right up here in this corner. Again, oftentimes I have to find myself thinking through this very specifically to know how I want to animate these objects. You'll see how this comes into play in just a moment. We'll take a look at skew real quick. So you can skew this object, and then you can also change the axis in which that is skewed on. So those are a couple of new properties on this shape. I'm going to undo those real quick. And now what I'll do to help a little bit, hopefully, I'm going to close up this rectangle and we'll draw a new shape. So I'm going to go up here, go to my rectangle tool, click and hold down on it, and I'll go to this ellipse tool and select it. I'm going to make sure that that shape layer is selected because I want to draw this new shape on that same shape layer. So with it selected, we'll just jump in here, click and drag, and you'll see that right now it takes on the same properties up here. You can change those. These can be separate for both of these shapes. But now down here on the shape layer, you'll see that we have that ellipse and we have that rectangle. If I open up the ellipse, there are all the same properties, transform properties again. So I can go here to the position and you'll notice that I'm not moving the rectangle, but that the ellipse is moving. And then I'll slide down a little bit more, go into the rectangle. I'll go into the transform properties for the rectangle and I can move it. So I still have separate controls for both of these shapes. And let me close all of this up. Now I'll go into the transform properties for the layer, and this is going to move everything. So hopefully this helps you understand how we have the shape layer and that these two objects have their own transform properties that can be adjusted separately from the transform properties of the layer. I'm going to go here and reset my layer so that I have that centered. Now, a couple of reasons that you might want multiple shapes on one layer. Well, first, what you just saw, I can move them all together at the same time. I don't have to try to individually move them. And then also, if I want to add an effect to these, I'll do that real quick. I'm going to make sure that my shape layer is selected. I'm going to go up here to Effect, drop down to Blur, and I'm going to go to Gaussian Blur. And you'll see now that that effect is being applied to both of these shapes. And I only have one place that I have to go to control that effect. We'll explore these two shapes a little bit more. Yes, I can go in here, and if I want to change the fill and the stroke for this ellipse, I just click on it, make sure in the contents right here that that is the one that is selected. Then I can go up here and either change them here, and let me change that color. Hit OK. Or I can open up the ellipse itself and go into the stroke and fill and change them there also. So you have complete control over every shape that's on that shape layer. You're not constrained to all of them looking the same. I'm going to close these up real quick, and I'm going to delete that ellipse. And this is simple enough. I'm going to close up this first shape layer here, and I'm going to make sure that nothing is selected in my timeline. I'm going to just draw another shape on another shape layer just to demonstrate that. My ellipse tool is selected. I'll come in here, click and drag. And as long as I had nothing selected, no other shape layer selected in the timeline, you'll now see that I have shape layer 1 and I have shape layer 2. Shape layer 1 has the rectangle on it, and shape layer 2 has the ellipse on it. I'm going to look at another way of drawing these shapes real quick. I'm going to make sure that my timeline down here is selected. I don't have any layers, but if I did, I would need to make sure that none of them were selected also. Then I'll go back up here to the shape tool, select whichever shape I want. So we'll go ahead and do the rounded rectangle. I'll select it and then double click on it. You'll see now that it has drawn a rounded rectangle for us. We can go in here if this is not the size that you want and drop into the properties, and you can adjust that. I'm going to delete this because we want to take a look at some of the other shapes that exist. Back up here at our shape tool, we'll click and hold down on it. There's the rectangle tool, the rounded rectangle tool, the ellipse tool. All three of those are very similar in their properties. Then we have the polygon and star tool. We'll start off with the polygon tool. I'll click on it, and then like I did just a moment ago, double click. I can go in here to the poly star, open it up, and we'll take a look at the properties that are in it. It's mostly going to be right here in the polystar path. We have the ability to change the number of points. We can bring this down to a triangle, or we can increase that up to a point where it pretty much looks like a circle. So we have a lot of options on that. The other is the radius, the outer radius, and then also this outer roundness. So that is basically the size. So we can bring that down. And then we can round these corners here. And again, pretty much get to where we have a circle. Now, keep in mind, all of this is handy because you can animate this. And you can also see that going in an opposite direction with that outer roundness begins to create different shapes. Keep in mind that we can explore this by turning off the stroke, or we can do the opposite, have the stroke and get rid of the fill. And so there's a lot of different things that you can do with this. All of the other options in there are pretty much the same. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this layer, and then we'll go back up, select the star tool there, and then double click on it. Creates a star for us. I'll go ahead and add a fill back into this. And we can take a look at the polystar. Again, the differences in properties is going to be in this path right here. You'll see now that we have, just like before, this number of points that we want, and this is a lot more powerful than the polystar. And then you'll also be able to make adjustments on the inner and outer radius and the inner and outer roundness. This is where, working with it is going to take a little bit of time and getting used to it and figuring out what you can create with it. And then on the roundness there, the inner roundness and then the outer roundness. So there's a lot that you can do with this. And keep in mind, again, all of this can be animated and you can create all kinds of different shapes with it. I'm now going to take a look at some options on the stroke. To do that, I'm going to go up here and create a new ellipse. So I'm going to select that ellipse tool right there. And I'm going to go with no fill. So click on that and no fill right there, hit OK. We'll adjust that width in just a few minutes. And then we can just double click on the ellipse tool. It draws that for us. I'm going to drop down here into the ellipse path and we'll just bring that down in size. And we're going to jump into the stroke options right here. I'm going to slide down here and we'll take a look at dashes, taper, and wave. Start with dashes. And to add a dash to this, just click the plus button. And you'll see now it is a dashed line. We can adjust that dash right there, the size of it. And then right up there at the top, pay attention to how it is as we adjust that. If you want to kind of make sure that these are the same size all the way around and you want a specific number, you'll just have to work with that up there. And if you're having trouble adjusting, that's what I'm talking about right there. You can let go of it, click on this number, and you can use your arrow keys to arrow up and down. And you'll see that it is adjusting this one number at a time. If you want to get a little more specific, hold down the control key and it's going to do points on that. So we can keep moving that in until about right somewhere in there. I'm just trying to see when it stops moving. Looks about right there. And so we should be pretty much matched up on these being the same size all the way around. I'm going to go back over here and I'm going to reset this back to 10. And we can now, if we want a little more control over this, is we can go back to the dashes, click on the plus button, and now we have the gap. And so we can adjust the gap between these. They'll pretty much stay the same size, but now we can adjust the distance between them. We can still adjust the dash itself. And we have the gap option there also. I will be honest, this takes a little bit of getting used to, especially when you're trying to do specific numbers. It's not real intuitive as to say, I want 36 dashes in this distance. It takes a little bit of working with, learning how to work with it to get that exact. Now, this does have the ability that if we want to, we can add yet another dash to it and make an even more interesting look with it. Not only another dash, but also another gap. So working with this, will definitely take a little bit of getting used to, figuring it out and seeing what you can create with it, but it is a pretty powerful tool. Now, if you decide, I don't want the dash, I don't want the gap, All you have to do is just start clicking the minus button there, and it'll get rid of those. I'm going to show you one more thing on this that can be very helpful. I'm going to go back to the dashes and make sure I have a dash and a gap. And I'm going to set this back to 10. This will be our starting point for this. Set both of them to 10. Now, I want to create circles rather than dashes, which can be very helpful. To do that, we're going to need to go here to the line cap, and we're going to need to adjust to a round cap right there. We're not seeing much right at this point, but if we'll bring that dash all the way down to 0, and then we'll open up that gap, you'll see now we have perfectly round circles rather than the dashes. To increase the size of these, simply go up to the stroke width and increase there. And so between the stroke width and then also that gap right there, you can create a line of circles. Now keep in mind that this is going to work on any stroke. So any shape that you create, you can create these dashes, these circles. To explore our other two options, I'm going to go down here to our dashes, and I'll just click the minus button on both of them. We're back to our stroke there. We'll take a look at the taper option now, open it up, and we have start and end length, we have start and end width, and then start and end ease. And we'll just play with those to see what happens. So on the start length, I'm going to bring that up to 100%. And you can see here that we start basically at nothing, and then we begin to ease up on that stroke, increasing its width all the way around. If we want to go to the end length there and bring that up also, you can see we get this really nice shape. I'm going to bring that end length back down to 0, and I'll work with the start width now, and I'll increase that. Kind of has the opposite effect of that start length, but you can see how that can be useful. And then I'll drop down here to the start ease and bring that up. So you have the ability to taper these, which can create some very stylistic looks. I'm going to bring this back to 0 on that, and then we'll jump out of taper, and we'll go down here to wave. And easy enough, we'll increase the amount there, and you can see that it creates a wavy looking stroke. And if we want to animate this, you can drop down to the phase, and you can see there that it's moving that, almost rotating that around. You also have the wavelength there that you can increase and decrease. And then also there on the units, you can change it from pixels to cycles. And again, adjust the cycles, and then also animate that. So there's a couple of different options in the stroke that will help you create different looking strokes on any of these shapes. I hope this has been helpful. If you'll stay with me in some later videos, I'm going to go over how I've created some of these badges, as well as some other animations for this tutorial itself. And for more on digital content creation, hit the like and subscribe button and check out my other tutorials.